Circles. 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2. First. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, knees. 1, 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1. First. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2. Exercises. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, circles. 2, 3. Reverse. 1, 2, 3, 4. Big stretch. Oh. Good fight. Breathing. Shoulders, okay. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Reverse. 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 8. Just try when stepping up yourself. You can just breathe in, out. Kind of stepping from the form. So one thing to keep in mind is that it's actually a little wider than the heel, so these, the modern style is a little more open stance, and the blue style we usually do is more closed.
It is wider?
It is wider. It is, so it's a wider stance. All right, so why don't we try the form?
Okay, deep breathing. So one of the things about Tai Chi is that it's usually looks very graceful and soft, and you know, and it's done outdoors in slow motion, and it's, you know, it's a big challenge to try to replicate what you see. But the thing is, when we learn it like in this blocky form, and how do you get that to become fluid? So it's just the size of the movement, and it's also, you know, because the size of the movement will determine how fluid it could be and so forth. So the smaller the movement, the easier it is to create circles, right? Like if you're stirring a cup, you hold a teaspoon, you just kind of turn it, because it only requires your wrists to do it. When you're doing bigger movement, it requires a lot more components to create that same motion. So what's difficult is that you have to control those other, you know, pieces, the other components that make up your appendage. So to make a circle like this, like you're writing your name, is very easy. But if you had to write your name on the wall, or do something like a, you know, what they do on the walls, what do you call those, murals? Yeah, it's a lot harder to do, because you have to try to have the proportions right and still capture all of that. So, you know, and then at the same token, if you were to stir a cup, you wouldn't do it like this. It wouldn't work. So when you're doing these movements, if you are creating a big circle, you have to make a big circle, but the circle doesn't come from here. It comes from either your elbow, your wrists, or your shoulders, and it's in a plane of movement. So you have ward off, roll back, press and push, which is grasp the sparrow's tail. So when we're in that position, we ward off, roll back, press, and push. So it takes a lot of coordination for your body to synchronize that. And that coordination isn't developed simply because you saw it. It's developed because you're doing it over and over again, so that your body starts to understand what's required to create that same image that you're seeing through your eyes. What you see in your eyes houses this image, and that image is, you know, what you think you see. I say think you see because it doesn't pick up everything that you imagine you're seeing. So you can miss a lot. And then if you try to figure out when certain things happen, it's pretty hard to figure out, because, you know, which part moves first. You know, I think you asked the question, should you move it from the legs at one time, or is it your spine, is it your hips? You know, movements, the power comes from the legs, but what connects the upper to the lower is your torso. So your upper body and lower body have to be tied through this area, right? And space is developed by volume. If you go forward and back, that's just one dimension, one direction. It comes back like this. So that's rolling back and pushing forward. When we're like this and we're holding the ball, we have a movement like this, right? So what allows you to create some of the accuracy of movement is that you define your center. So here's our center. Here's our horizontal elbow. You have to fill that center by passing through it, so that you find your balance point. So when you ward off, you have to come through your center. So that creates a waist movement, and your center's here, but your center's moving, right? Isn't your center moving? If it's moving, you have to track that sort of synchronization of your center and that movement become a connection. So if you don't track your center and you do this, then they kind of separate it. So there's not that alignment of movement. So if you were to pull a string like this, you wouldn't be able to do that if this hand is here and this hand is here, if you're trying to get the hand to here. Why? Because there's no connection, like a kite. You know, if you fly a kite, the top and the bottom are two lines of energy, and the string that connects the two is taut if there's wind blowing it, right? It can't be like that unless it loses that energy by the wind breaking. So when you do this movement, that line is like a thread of silk. So that's why they call it, silk reeling. So if we're here and you pass through, the hand has to be connected. That's where you create the continuity of movement. Now, is both hands moving evenly and equally? Not necessarily, because one side can be passive. I start here, and then the body continues to turn, but you have to keep the alignment between here and here. Okay, so that concept I just use as an example because it's easiest to see because it's a long line, right? When you step up and raise your hand like we do in the Wu style, there's a line from here to here. When you raise your hand and separate, there's a line from there to, that's an imaginary line, but that line is sort of like an energy between the two sides, because if you were to pull, that line has to be connected. If you're pulling a thread, a rope or a string. But when you get to the ends, you know that the two sides are connected. When you hold a stick, it's the same thing. You hold the two ends and you have the two. But because this is soft, using a rope, is your hands expanding it in a direction, or is it going off and then never really reaching its end because you can't connect the two sides, right? So, that's how your movement should be when you're creating all these actions. Now, when we do this, if you turn and you're going to do repulse the monkey, and you don't elongate your arm, then this becomes kind of flaccid, and then it comes here, and then you go like this, it becomes flaccid, right? Then that piece of thread is kind of dangling there. It never really makes it to a point where it feels like it's connected here. Then when you pull it down, it doesn't feel like it's pulling the other hand and then coming forward. So if you use that as your imagination, or use that as a feeling, then you start to want to connect the two sides. See? So when you go back, and I'm pulling like this, now just look at this motion. If I go like this, and I go like this, it's like my leg and my hand were moving together, right? You see what I mean? Just like insert the needle. So if I'm turning and then I'm stepping forward, it's like my leg now is stretching out from my hand. Now when if I start to lean forward and I turn, then when my hand goes down, it's like it's pulling this hand in. And then when I turn my body, it's like this hand is pulling this side. So that's a relationship, because it feels like you're trying to tie it together. So that's where you have a right and left relationship. You have an upper and lower relationship, and you're drawing those lines, but those lines are also, structure and geometry, and you will manipulate your skeletal structure in order to create that motion. Then as you pass through, it's as if both sides are working together. So that's how you develop the continuity. And it doesn't break because your consciousness of the movement doesn't stop. The physical side appears to stop, but the consciousness of your movement doesn't really appear to It doesn't really stop. Even though I'm here, it feels as if I'm ready to move again. So those are like signaling or trigger points that tell you that this is what's going to happen next. And all that's happening up here. So these are concepts you have, but movement has to be supported by concept. Otherwise, it's just kind of random. But because we're trying to develop sequence of events, we're trying to build coordination, we have to understand what that cycle is, right? We have to develop that cycle just like, when you play a piece of music, it has a cycle and it has to be so that's something you build with the notes. We're building this off of fundamental pieces of motion, the basic things, which are triangles, circles, squares, forward, backward, right and left, center, which is up and down, and you can just take that into space and now you have volume, right? That's what three-dimensional movement is. In fact, when we think of three-dimensional movement, we're not just thinking about those 5 dimensions or 5 points, because every component has these same 5 elements, right? 5 components. If I go like this, it goes forward. I go like this, it goes backward. I go like this or this, it goes right and left, right? If I go like this, up and down, then I have to create the up and down by lifting or sinking. So these movements are created by pieces in your body. If I straighten my leg, I go up. I bend my leg, I go down. I push my leg this way, I go forward. I push this one, I go backwards. Now I really can't turn my leg completely unless I pivot on the heel, or I drive it from the body, or I drive it from the body. So right and left is created by your spine. Your spine is an axle, and you rotate off that pivot point. Now, we can't pivot 360 degrees. We can only pivot 45 degrees. We can pivot 180 if we pivot our feet. But if you think about the pivot point where I pivot my foot, it's really my spine traveling through the heel and allows me to turn. Right, so I turn this way 45 degrees. I want to turn more, I actually have to turn my foot. But when I turn my foot, it's actually because the axle that's vertical is allowing me to spin. So I only have a half a circle, essentially, using your spine as a pivot. And then if I go forward and back, the only thing your spine is actually doing is always trying to find the position where it's going to find a point to pivot. When we think about, if I go forward and I turn out like this, and I step up, my spine is in my heel, allows me to turn. When I sit back, my spine is on my heel, allows me to turn. So you turn anywhere outside of that point, then you're really not true enough to pivot your torso. So that's what we have to get our body to do. Now we're in a forward position. Should you turn? You can't really turn. So we don't turn really much here. But we can turn here on the way back. See? So we initiated here, but that's about as far as we can go until we start to sit back. And then we start to turn like that. The same when we sit like this, we're turning here. Insert the needle is forward and back. Now here I turn. You see I turn while I'm here, and I lean forward. If I sit here and I turn, I actually tilt and turn. But when I tilt and turn, this becomes a pivot point. The rear foot follows, and then I'm here. Now I'm back on this foot. I'm here. When I shift like this, My pivot point is back to here. And then I'm here. Then I cross my arms. I'm here. I sit back and I pivot. So you notice you're always pivoting once you get over that foot. See? So that's something you have to be aware of. And then eventually you begin to feel your balance point and you shift through that. So, yeah. You have a question?
So you were talking about his hand sort of sweeping.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I got the impression that sort of happened before the other.
It does. It does.
Really saying they're together,
They're joined together, but one's pulling the other one. So one's leading the other. So that's not exactly simultaneous, in a sense that they're not going like this. It's because while they're connected, it doesn't really come from here. It comes from here. So what happens when you go down and around, your hands are actually doing this. So when I turn them here, I'm turning here and then I push off of there. You see? So the turn is always when your back is here. Because we're not sinking, we feel like we're turning here. So, but you don't have your stance. So you have to actually turn, sink, turn, and turn. So when this is here, this is actually coming down like this, but it's coming obliquely down. And then coming across like this. So what controls that is this. So each side actually has its own pattern of movement. So that pattern of movement is this. Right? Carry tiger to the mountain, we do this. But because they're both done simultaneously, there's no turning. But if I take this movement and turn, then it becomes this. Right? This hand is like this. So this is like this. Or this. Because this is one form of the push, this is the other form of the push. Then you want to lead with the fingers and with the palm. So we did this, like leopard and tiger swings to mountain, your hands are like this. So you're doing this. Right, so you come down, when you come over, so it's the reverse of this one, right? This is like this. This is like this. See, so it's like a wave. But what creates a wave is the relaxing of the elbow. So you have to practice your movement. Like this is a wave. The hands are just essentially doing this. As you synchronize the turn, you're here. So that's the sinking of the elbow. The sinking of the elbow. The sinking of the elbow. So then you can start to think of the relationship between your knees and your hips. Your knees and your elbows and your shoulders and hips. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so when you do the wave, then your elbow is really controlling your motion. Sink the elbow, relax the shoulder. 45 degrees. Sink. Lift. So, a lot of learning is trial and error, right? A lot of it's trial and error. And a lot of it is discovery, because you have to try to discover what the motion feels like when it feels correct. And then the other side of it is trying to replicate what you see. Because what you see is not always what you get. There was a song, remember that, way back in the 60s. So when you think you see something, you copy it. That's how we learn. And we mimic the movement, and then we end up doing the best we can with it. And then single whip, remember we talked about last time when we're here. Turn, comes out to here. Try to keep this long. All right, well, let's go through the form again. Yeah. We'll do that one, then we'll do 42. So that's kind of theory, give you something to think about. Okay, deep breathing. Good. So, we go through 42. Okay, ready? Okay, good. So we just let it go. So in Tai Chi we say relax, whole body fong song. Fong song means to let go. It's just releasing the tension in your joints and your body. Because when there's tension, this becomes conflict. So in movement you have to let your body go, and it wants to just move. But the whole premise is to create good circulation. Circulatory, our circulatory system is only designed to move fluids in our body. Nutrients, oxygen, all that has to go through the systemic system to move, just to complete the cycle, the circuit. So we have to bring nutrients to every cell in the body. If you don't move, then certain areas won't get the same results. Then that's not just the body, the brain, every organ in your body, all of this has to work as one system. So when we're moving, even though it's directed by the mind, your goal is to do it without the mind. So you go into it. So that point, that stage of movement is just part of your subconscious. It just happens. And then once it gets to that point, then you can go back and revisit everything you're doing to see if you're doing it right. That's part of how you evolve. You go through the process. You take away some, you add some, you delete some, you bring in some, and then it's all part of the course of learning. And it's just a process that you could do forever. You could do it for a lifetime. So, any questions? No? Yeah. Kim, anything? No? Arena? Cloud hands? Yeah. So the last cloud hand, you're going to be here, right? Once you're here, then you pivot on the toe of the back foot, and then you're going to retreat. And this is beat the tiger. Right, and then you do the heel kick or the toe kick, and then 2 punches there. So this, when you get to here, the last one, this sets you up to do your next movement. So you're here, Jade Lady Watch, then this goes back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2. If you make one circle, then you just go to here, and then you do your heel kick. 2 punches to the ear, scoot down, do it again with the toe. There's a toe kick. Actually, all 3 of these are toe kicks. Generally, there's a heel kick before this. In this form, it's all 3 of those are toe kicks. So you time the movement so when you're here, you stroke down like in the Wu style. We do the beat the tiger like this, right? And then we turn, and then we do the toe kick. Then we're going to scoot down to this. So in the Wu style form, we do a heel kick, right? And then go to this. So the last one, you just do the pivot to take you to the oblique in the corner. And then just go to one of these. But this style has this. Yeah, so, okay, ready? Bow. So in the 42, they have a Wu style beat the tiger.